Imagine settling into your airplane seat for a long-anticipated vacation, excited to see new horizons. Maybe snap some photos above the clouds, when suddenly a single question shatters the comfort you'd just found. "Excuse me, miss, can I see your ticket one more time?" Those words came from the pilot himself, voice dripping with an authority no one dared question. Passengers around you turn their heads, confusion mingling with curiosity. But one person knows exactly what he's implying, and it's not just routine. Little does anyone know this moment will spark a chain reaction reaching the airline's legal department and beyond. Buckle up. A delicate hush fell over Terminal 2 of Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta, International Airport, where families, business travelers, and excited tourists lined up for boarding. The overhead screens flickered with flight updates, while voices from the intercom announced final boarding calls for flights headed off to distant corners of the globe. Among them, Flight SI-487, operated by the fictional Skyward International, stood out. It was a hot ticket, a direct route from bustling Atlanta to the sunny coasts of Los Angeles, and the gate area was teeming with people ready to depart. 16-year-old Aliyah Thomas sat by a large plate-glass window, her smartphone in hand, capturing the slow ballet of planes on the tarmac. Every few minutes, she'd glance back at her mother, Denise Thomas, who was grabbing them a quick sandwich from a nearby cafe. They'd been planning this trip for half a year, a mother-daughter getaway, to celebrate Aliyah's acceptance into a prestigious summer art program. Aliyah's father had recently passed away, and Denise wanted to bolster her daughter's spirit by creating positive new memories together. This trip was supposed to be an escape, a breath of fresh air after a challenging season of grief and adaptation. Aliyah's hair was styled in a neat braid that stretched just above her waist. She wore a simple outfit, jeans, sneakers, and a graphic t-shirt that read "Black Girls Shine" in colorful lettering. She had saved her allowance to buy that shirt online. She saw it as a personal mantra, a reminder of her own worth and potential. She hadn't expected the shirt to attract any special attention, good or bad. But as fate would have it, that simple piece of clothing would soon serve as the visual ignition for a life-changing event. When Denise returned with sandwiches, Aliyah's eyes lit up. She was hungry, but more than that, she was itching to talk about her big summer plans. She'd never been to Los Angeles before, and her mind conjured images of palm trees, gorgeous beaches, and the glittering Hollywood sign. Denise, trying to hide her exhaustion, encouraged Aliyah to keep dreaming out loud. "I can't wait to see the campus," Aliyah said, between bites of her sandwich. "They say it's near so many art galleries I might never come back." Denise laughed. "You better come back. I can't afford to live out there with you, not yet, anyway." Aliyah giggled, but her joy was genuine, something she hadn't been able to express freely for months after her father's death. Their boarding group was called soon after. Together they entered the jet bridge, with excitement thrumming in their veins, oblivious to the storm that would soon engulf them. Once inside the airplane's cabin, Aliyah was delighted to see a relatively modern interior. The seats were upholstered in a soft grey, accentuated by blue trim that matched the airline's logo on the overhead bins. The flight attendants greeted passengers with polite smiles and directed them to their seats. Aliyah and Denise had chosen seats near the window on the left side of the plane. The seatbelt sign was still off, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and industrial cleaner. A flight attendant named Tracy Baldwin, a tall woman with light brown hair, pinned into a neat bun, greeted them warmly as they settled in. She even offered Aliyah a set of complimentary earphones for the in-flight entertainment, she said, noticing how Aliyah's face lit up at the mention of the seatback screens. Denise gave the flight attendant a polite smile. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." "It's a pleasure," Tracy replied. "We're happy to have you on board. If there's anything else you need, just let me know." Aliyah was busy investigating the screen in front of her, exploring the list of movies and TV shows. She made a mental note to check out an art documentary that had caught her eye. The tension she'd carried in her shoulders for months began to melt away. This trip was already feeling special, a sure sign that their mother-daughter bonding was off to the right start. Passengers continued to trickle into the cabin, stuffing suitcases into overhead compartments with determined grunts. Soon the aisle got crowded, then cleared again. Eventually, the flight attendants announced the final boarding call and the jet bridge pulled away from the aircraft. The plane door was closed with a hollow thud that signified the transition from the bustle of the airport to the isolation of a pressurized tube hurtling through the skies. Denise and Aliyah barely noticed the final announcements. They were too absorbed in planning how to spend their time once they arrived in Los Angeles. This was a new chapter for both of them, light, refreshing, with the promise of future growth. Little did they know they were about to step into an ugly confrontation with prejudice that would overshadow every bit of their excitement. As the plane taxied toward the runway, there was a sudden stir in the forward cabin. The cockpit door opened, and out stepped the pilot, Captain Roger Alton. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had a crisp uniform with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder. A quick glance would suggest he was simply making a final check or addressing a concern. However, the vibe he exuded was unsettling. His rigid posture and a certain tension in his gaze seemed out of place for a routine flight. Passengers noticed, but quickly turned back to their phones or seatback screens, assuming it was none of their business. However, Captain Alton started walking down the aisle, an uncommon move for a pilot who should be finalizing pre-flight tasks. The plane was still rolling slowly, and flight attendants usually discourage moving around at this stage. Yet here he was, scanning the rows intently. At first it looked like he was searching for a seat belt not fastened or a tray table left down. When he reached row 14, where Aliyah and Denise sat, he paused. Tracy, the flight attendant, noticed the pilot's presence immediately and offered a supportive smile, but confusion colored her features. The pilot's eyes settled on Aliyah, specifically on her t-shirt, the one that read, "Black Girls Shine." Aliyah noticed the pilot's gaze and gave a polite nod, a small smile of acknowledgement. He didn't return it. Instead, he cleared his throat loud enough for the passengers across the aisle to look up. Then came the question that would unravel everything. "Young lady," he said, voice gruff, "could I see your boarding pass once more?" Aliyah blinked, perplexed. She had already shown her boarding pass at the gate. Sure," she mumbled, reaching for her phone where she had the digital copy. Denise's brow furrowed and she glanced at her daughter, then at the pilot. "Is there a problem?" Captain Denise asked, calm but guarded. Captain Alton didn't respond right away. Aliyah handed him her phone, where the electronic boarding pass glowed on the screen. He studied it, lips pressed into a thin line. Then he leaned closer to verify the seat assignment. "I wanted to make sure we didn't have a seat mix-up," he said curtly, returning the phone without even a hint of an apology or a smile. Aliyah swallowed her discomfort. Her seat was correctly assigned. Why single her out? No one else in that row had been asked to produce their pass again. A quiet tension buzzed between them. Denise broke the silence. "Did you need to check anything else?" she asked, her tone tinged with polite challenge. The pilot shook his head, but held their gaze a second longer than necessary. "No," he said, and then he turned on his heel, heading back toward the cockpit. Aliyah's heart thumped in her chest. She noticed people staring at her, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. She tried to focus on the overhead announcements, reminding passengers of the safety procedures, but her mind was stuck on that interaction. It felt wrong, invasive, and humiliating. Denise patted her daughter's hand in reassurance, but her own eyes reflected the same simmering anger. She hoped the situation was a one-off. She was wrong. After that unsettling encounter, the engines roared and the plane accelerated down the runway. Aliyah felt the familiar press of her body against the seat as they lifted off. She usually found takeoff exhilarating, an electric reminder of going places, leaving old baggage behind. But this time, anxiety clung to her like a wet blanket, damping any excitement. She looked around to see if other passengers were sharing her unease. Across the aisle, an older gentleman wearing a Georgia Tech hoodie gave Aliyah a small nod of reassurance as if to say, "I saw that. Are you okay?" She smiled back politely. A row behind them, a woman shook her head, probably disapproving of the pilot's behavior. Once the plane leveled off, the seatbelt sign dinged, allowing passengers to move about. The flight attendants began the standard routine, passing out drinks, offering snacks, and smiling as if nothing was amiss. Aliyah noticed that Tracy, the flight attendant, who had been so friendly earlier, seemed a bit on edge. She kept glancing toward the cockpit door, an unsettled expression on her face. Denise leaned over to Aliyah and spoke in a low voice. "Don't let that rattle you. We've dealt with worse. Just enjoy your flight." Aliyah forced a smile. She reached for her in-flight screen, trying to distract herself with an art documentary. But her eyes kept drifting toward the cockpit door, half expecting the pilot to appear again. Memories of her father and the racism he'd faced in his own career. He'd been a software engineer, often mistaken for the tech support instead of the project lead, floated through her mind. He had always told her to stand her ground, but also to pick her battles wisely. Right now, Aliyah wasn't sure which of those lessons applied. The overhead speakers chimed and the co-pilot First Officer Carmen Lee introduced herself, announcing their cruising altitude and expected arrival time in Los Angeles. She sounded calm, professional, and unlike Captain Alton, welcoming. Aliyah felt some reassurance in the co-pilot's presence, though she wondered if she was aware of what had happened. Not long after the seatbelt sign went off, Captain Alton's voice replaced Carmen's. He briefed the flight on weather conditions, potential turbulence, and what he called a safe and timely arrival. Yet there was something disconcertingly clipped about his tone, a certain edge that put Aliyah's nerves on high alert. 15 minutes later, the flight crew began the standard drink service. Tracy and her colleague Michael pushed the cart down the aisle, distributing soda cans and little plastic cups. When it came to Aliyah and Denise, Tracy offered a gentle, apologetic half-smile. "Everything all right?" she asked in a whisper. Denise nodded slowly, but her eyes spoke a different story. "We're okay," she said. "Was that normal procedure?" Tracy looked conflicted, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "He sometimes does random checks," she lied, and her hesitation was obvious. "If you need anything, let me know." "Okay," Aliyah nodded, thanking her for the Sprite and the small packet of peanuts. The flight attendant's eyes lingered, betraying a concern she couldn't voice openly. As Tracy moved to the next row, Denise sighed, then turned to her daughter. "We'll handle this if it comes up again," she assured Aliyah. "Just try to relax." Aliyah took a slow sip of her Sprite. It tasted flat, somehow reflecting her own deflated excitement. She tried to immerse herself in the documentary, focusing on brushstrokes and color palettes, but her mind kept returning to the unsettling question, why me? About an hour into the flight, The dreaded moment arrived. The seatbelt sign flickered on unexpectedly, and an announcement from Captain Alton instructed everyone to return to their seats. Aliyah braced herself for turbulence, but the skies looked clear outside her window. Indeed, the airplane felt stable, with no jolts or shakes. Then she saw him step out of the cockpit again. He walked with a purpose, heading straight toward row 14. Heart pounding, Aliyah exchanged a worried glance with her mother. Was he coming to question her again? Had something gone wrong? This time, his approach attracted more stares from surrounding passengers. Some turned down their reading lights to watch the drama unfold more clearly. He paused by their row, looked directly at Aliyah, and spoke loudly enough for at least the next 3 rows to hear. "Miss, I need to verify your boarding pass once more." Aliyah's cheeks burned. "You already checked it," she said, attempting to keep her voice steady. Denise's eyes flashed with anger. "Captain, is there a reason my daughter's ticket needs this level of scrutiny?" Somewhere behind them, a passenger muttered, "What is going on?" Another passenger whispered, "Is this discrimination?" The tension was thick enough to slice. Captain Alton seemed unperturbed. "We have a report that there might be someone in the wrong seat. I'm simply following up." Aliyah could feel her chest tighten. She knew the seat was correct. They had purchased the tickets weeks in advance, selected seats online, and double-checked at the gate. Why was he harping on this? Denise lifted her chin. "This is the second time you've followed up on the same seat. If you're implying my daughter doesn't belong here, we're going to have a real problem." By now, the nearby rows fell silent. All ears turned toward the confrontation. Aliyah handed over her phone once more, and Denise glared at the pilot. Captain Alton took the phone and made a show of scrolling through the ticket details. After a painfully long pause, he handed it back. "Everything seems correct. My apologies for the inconvenience." The words "my apologies" dripped with condescension rather than genuine remorse. With that, he turned and stalked back toward the cockpit, leaving a swirl of outrage in his wake. Denise gripped the armrest, her knuckles whitening. Aliyah exhaled a shaky breath. Across the aisle, the older gentleman leaned over. "Are you two all right?" he asked softly. Denise nodded, swallowing back her indignation. "We're fine," she lied. But they weren't fine. Aliyah's nerves were frayed, and Denise's sense of protective maternal anger was rising dangerously. A hush lingered, even as people tried to resume their in-flight activities, reading, napping, or watching movies. Everyone could feel that something was deeply wrong here, but no one knew exactly what to do. Tracy passed by again this time, with genuine concern etched into her face. She knelt down beside their seats, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "I'm so sorry this is happening. Is there anything I can do?" Denise glanced at Aliyah, who looked both embarrassed and infuriated. "We just want to get to Los Angeles in peace," Denise said. "But if he comes back a third time—" "I understand," Tracy said. "Listen. I'm going to speak to my supervisor, the lead flight attendant, and see what we can do. This is not normal." As soon as Tracy departed, another passenger, a middle-aged black woman in row 15, spoke up. "I saw what happened. I've got your back if you need a witness or anything." "It's ridiculous." Her name, as Aliyah later learned, was Beverly James, and she would prove instrumental in what was to come. Denise offered a grateful smile. "Thank you, I appreciate it." Aliyah felt marginally better knowing there were supportive people around. Yet the memory of the pilot's accusatory eyes wouldn't leave her mind. She wondered what had triggered him. Was it her t-shirt, her hairstyle, or simply the color of her skin. She remembered her father's stories about microaggressions at work, tiny jabs that left big emotional bruises. But this felt more overt, more hostile, and it didn't seem to be ending any time soon. Another hour passed. The cabin lights dimmed for the mid-flight stretch. People settled in to read watch movies or nap. Denise, however, was restless. She had a powerful ally in her phone, her cousin Lucas Porter, a civil rights lawyer based in Atlanta, one of the best in his field. Lucas had a reputation for fearlessly taking on discrimination cases. Denise debated texting him mid-flight, though she knew she wouldn't have a signal. Perhaps she could draft something to send as soon as they landed. On an impulse, she opened her notes app and started typing. She documented the times, the dialogues, and the details of the 2 confrontations so far. Aliyah watched her mother, feeling a mix of pride and anxiety. Denise was not one to back down, especially when it concerned her child's dignity. Their seatmate, an older woman who had been quietly reading a novel, leaned over and murmured, "Good idea. Document everything." As if on cue, Tracy returned, accompanied by Robert Quinn, the lead flight attendant, a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and a meticulously maintained uniform. His expression was serious, though also tinged with empathy. He knelt by their row, just as Tracy had done, before keeping his voice low. "I'm aware there's been an issue," Robert said, measuring each word carefully. "First, let me extend my apologies. This is highly unusual. We want you to feel comfortable and safe." Denise studied him, trying to gauge if he was genuine or just following a script. "I appreciate that, but your captain has singled out my daughter for no valid reason twice. This is harassment at the very least. I'm also quite sure it's racially motivated." Robert took a breath, glancing at Aliyah, then lowered his voice further. "I can't speak to his motivations, ma'am, but I can assure you the airline does not condone discrimination. I've already filed an incident report that will go to our corporate office. Is there anything immediate I can do to assist you both right now?" Denise hesitated, looking to Aliyah for a clue. Aliyah just shrugged, fighting tears of anger. "Just ask him to leave us alone," Aliyah managed to say quietly. Robert nodded. "I'll make every effort to ensure that. If you have any concerns, any at all, press the call button. I will come personally." "Okay," Denise nodded, though skepticism lingered in her eyes. "All right. Thank you." Satisfied for the moment, Robert stood adjusting his tie. Tracy offered a kind smile and squeezed Aliyah's shoulder gently. They moved on, speaking in hushed tones, as they made their way to the front of the cabin. Aliyah tried to force her attention back to the art documentary, but the images on the screen blurred into unrecognizable shapes. She couldn't focus. Memories of her father drifted to the surface, how he taught her to turn anger into creation. "If you can't paint it, write it. If you can't write it, sing it," he'd say. "Use the feeling to make something beautiful." Right now, she couldn't create anything but heartbreak in her mind. She felt the sting of injustice that countless individuals had encountered in daily life, schools, workplaces, and now even 30,000 feet in the air. She wondered if her father could see her now, maybe giving her a gentle nudge toward a calm, empowered response. But he wasn't here. She had to rely on her mother and herself. Looking out the window, the sky appeared infinite, a panoramic sea of clouds and light that seemed to mock the pettiness of human prejudice. How could there be so much wonder out there, and yet so much ugliness here in this pressurized cabin? Aliyah exhaled a shaky breath. She clicked off the screen, closed her eyes, and tried to doze off. Maybe in sleep, she could escape the uneasy tension. But her mind wouldn't shut down. Instead, it spun 1,000 scenarios, confronting the captain, ignoring him, calling out his racism over the PA system. She was, after all, a teenager, with swirling emotions, part defiance, part fear. None of these fantasies felt satisfying. A gentle voice broke her thoughts. "Honey, do you need the restroom or some water?" It was Denise trying to redirect her daughter's attention to something concrete. Aliyah shook her head, eyes still closed. "No, I'm fine," she whispered. But tears pricked her eyelids. Just when the cabin seemed to have settled into mid-flight routine, the overhead speakers crackled. Captain Alton's voice filled the air, sounding uncharacteristically tense. "Folks, we need all passengers to remain seated for a moment. Cabin crew, please stand by." The flight attendants exchanged puzzled looks. Robert and Tracy stood near the forward galley, talking hurriedly in hushed tones. Something was up. Aliyah and Denise felt a sense of foreboding. They both looked toward the cockpit door, half expecting the pilot to emerge once again for some arbitrary reason. Instead, they noticed First Officer Carmen Lee stepping out and speaking to Robert. Though they couldn't hear the exact words, her face was grave. Then Carmen looked directly at Aliyah and Denise, her expression empathetic but concerned. She inclined her head, as if to say, "I'm sorry." Robert grabbed the intercom phone on the wall of the galley. "Cabin crew, please pause service. I repeat, please pause service." A murmur rose among the passengers. Confusion spread like wildfire. Had there been an emergency? Some mechanical issue? Turbulence ahead. A moment later, Carmen returned to the cockpit, and Robert made his way down the aisle to row 14 again. But this time, he knelt in front of Aliyah and Denise with urgency. "I've just been informed by the co-pilot that our corporate legal team is on the line with the cockpit. They want to speak to you." Denise's eyes widened. Aliyah felt her stomach drop. Legal force legal team. That meant the pilot had escalated the situation, or possibly the flight attendants had done so. This was bigger than she'd imagined. Robert continued in a hushed tone. "They've gotten wind of an incident concerning allegations of discrimination. They insist on speaking to you directly. We're going to patch them through to the phone in the forward galley. Would you be willing to talk with them?" Denise looked at Aliyah. She saw a mixture of fear and resolve in her daughter's eyes. "Yes, we will," Denise said firmly. Aliyah unbuckled her seatbelt, heart pounding. "Do you want me to come too?" she asked. Robert nodded. "I think they want to hear from both of you." Denise and Aliyah stood up, and the other passengers parted like the Red Sea, curiosity etched into their faces. The walk to the front felt surreal. The lights flickered momentarily, and Aliyah's palms were sweating. She wasn't sure she was ready for a corporate confrontation. But the alternative, staying silent, felt worse. Inside the cramped forward galley, Robert closed a small curtain for privacy. A beige corded phone was mounted to the wall. He picked it up, pressed a button, and handed the receiver to Denise. "This is Denise Thomas," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Aliyah stood beside her, close enough to hear, but not so close as to pick up every word. Robert remained arms folded, a protective stance. On the other end, a male voice introduced himself as Richard DeWitt, an attorney from Skyward International's corporate office. "Ms. Thomas, he said we understand there's been a potential issue of discriminatory behavior by our pilot. We've just received a report from our cabin crew. Can you please confirm what happened? Denise's initial shock at being contacted mid-flight gave way to a sense of cautious relief. Maybe the airline was taking this seriously. She calmly recounted the events, the pilot's 2 separate demands to see Aliyah's boarding pass, the perceived hostility, and the fact that no other passengers appeared to be singled out. She included as many specifics as she could, aware that every word mattered. When she finished, there was a pause on the line. "Thank you, Ms. Thomas," said DeWitt. "We want to assure you that Skyward International has a strict anti-discrimination policy. We do not tolerate harassment, especially not racial profiling by our employees." Denise let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "That's good to hear," she said, her voice tight with residual anger. "But what exactly is happening now? Are you monitoring this flight?" DeWitt explained that the flight crew had reported the incident after speaking with the lead attendant. "We also received messages from some passengers who tweeted at our official Skyward account," DeWitt added. "It seems word spread quickly online." Aliyah's eyes widened. She hadn't even considered that other passengers might be tweeting about this in real time. DeWitt continued, "Captain Alton has been informed of the seriousness of this situation. We're conducting a review of his actions. Upon your arrival in Los Angeles, we will have customer relations staff waiting to take your statements in person. We will also offer any assistance you need, such as lodging or reaccommodation if you feel uncomfortable continuing your journey with Skyward International." Denise felt a wave of both relief and indignation. "All I want is for my daughter and me to finish this flight without further harassment. Then we'll decide how to proceed." She gestured for Aliyah to step closer. "My daughter would like to say something." Aliyah took the phone, her hands shaking. She introduced herself, a quiver in her voice. I just want to say that this whole thing has made me really uncomfortable. We didn't do anything wrong. Please make sure he doesn't come back here to embarrass me again." On the other end, DeWitt's tone softened. "Ms. Thomas, I'm so sorry this has happened. I've given the flight attendants permission to take any measure necessary to ensure your comfort. We appreciate your cooperation, and we assure you we're taking this seriously." They exchanged a few more words, and then the call ended. Robert gently took the receiver, hung it up, and studied Aliyah and Denise with concern. "Are you both okay?" Denise swallowed. "It depends on what you mean by okay. But we'll get through." Robert escorted them back to their seats, explaining to the other flight attendants that the conversation with legal had been completed. As Aliyah and Denise returned to row 14, they felt every eye in the cabin on them. People who had overheard bits and pieces craned their necks to see what was happening. A few offered encouraging nods or whispered condolences. Others just gawked, intrigued by the mid-flight drama. Once seated, Aliyah realized her legs were still trembling. She gripped the armrests, trying to anchor herself. Denise put an arm around her shoulders, whispering, "We're almost there. Just hang in." Beverly, the passenger behind them, who had offered support, leaned forward. "I heard some of that." "Good for you," she whispered. "If you need me as a witness, I'm here." Denise mouthed, "Thank you," her voice barely audible. Aliyah gave a small nod of appreciation. With the legal department now involved, Aliyah hoped that would keep Captain Alton at bay for the rest of the flight. But it was clear from the hush in the cabin and the tight-lipped expressions of the flight attendants that tension was far from over. 30 minutes passed in relative calm. Aliyah and Denise tried to watch a movie, but found it hard to concentrate. The flight attendants had resumed limited service, moving quietly through the aisles. They offered no announcements, no fanfare. Then, in a move that felt almost comical in its audacity, Captain Alton once again emerged from the cockpit. This time, First Officer Lee was right behind him, appearing anxious and slightly exasperated. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as if collectively thinking, "You've got to be kidding me." He marched straight up to row 14, yet again, ignoring the wide-eyed stares from half the cabin. Aliyah felt her heart rate skyrocket. Denise tensed the fury in her face unmistakable. Before he could speak, Denise rose from her seat, stepping into the aisle to intercept him. "That's enough," she said in a voice that rippled with anger. "We've already spoken to your legal department. If you have anything more to say, you can say it to them." First Officer Lee caught up to Alton and touched his arm, clearly trying to dissuade him. But the captain shrugged her off, never taking his eyes off Denise. Passengers nearby gasped. Some scrambled for their phones, presumably to record the escalating scene. Captain Alton's voice was icy. "Ma'am, I'm requesting that your daughter change seats. We have reason to believe she's disturbing the peace of other passengers." At that, a collective murmur of indignation swept through the rows. Beverly actually spoke up from behind. "What, that's the biggest lie I've heard. She's not bothering anyone." The older gentleman across the aisle stood up too. "She's been quiet as a mouse." "Sir, what exactly is your problem?" Aliyah stood behind her mother, hands clenched into fists. She felt tears threaten, but she didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Meanwhile, Denise was seething, trembling with a lethal mix of anger and disbelief. First Officer Lee stepped forward, trying to intervene. "Captain, we should return to the cockpit." "Now!" But Captain Alton seemed determined to have the final word. "I have the authority to remove passengers who disrupt flight operations," he declared. Denise took a step closer, fearlessly, meeting his glare. "My daughter has done nothing to disrupt anything. The entire cabin can attest to that." Suddenly, a chorus of voices erupted from surrounding seats. "She's been fine all flight." "You're the one causing a scene." "This is harassment, plain and simple." "We're recording this." The pilot's face reddened. It was clear the passengers had turned against him. Even the flight attendants hovered nearby, looking torn between official duty and moral obligation. First Officer Lee placed a hand on Captain Alton's shoulder. "Sir, let's go," she repeated more forcefully. For a moment, Alton looked like he might stand his ground. Then the intercom crackled overhead, and Tracy's voice came through with surprising authority. "Captain Alton, you are requested in the cockpit immediately. I repeat, immediately. That did it." With a final glare at Denise and Aliyah, the pilot spun on his heel and stormed back to the front. First Officer Lee offered a helpless, apologetic glance before following him. The cabin remained silent for several beats, the air thick with collective shock. Finally, someone said, "Wow." Another passenger exclaimed, "I've never seen anything like this in my life." The tension was a physical presence, but there was also a swell of solidarity building among the passengers who had witnessed the blatant harassment. No sooner had Captain Alton disappeared into the cockpit than a small group of passengers convened in the aisle near row 14. They introduced themselves to Denise and Aliyah, offering their eyewitness accounts if needed. The older gentleman across the aisle was named Richard Keene, a retired judge from Georgia. Beverly James was a marketing executive from Atlanta. Another woman, Naomi Singleton, was a school teacher traveling to a conference. They formed a spontaneous coalition of supporters who insisted on documenting everything they'd seen. Naomi even had partial video footage from her phone. It showed Captain Alton confronting Denise and Aliyah, though the audio was muffled by ambient cabin noise. Denise felt a glimmer of hope. This means a lot to us. I can't believe this is happening in 2025. It's disgusting, Beverly said. I've flown thousands of miles for work, and I've never seen a pilot go after someone like that. The retired judge, Richard Keene, spoke in a measured tone. Your best path is to continue documenting. When we land, I'll be happy to talk to authorities or airline representatives on your behalf. Aliyah looked at each of them, overwhelmed by their kindness. Thank you, she said, voice cracking with a mixture of relief and frustration. I don't know what to say. Say thank you and let us handle the rest, Beverly reassured her. You shouldn't have to go through this alone. A full hour passed without further confrontation. The pilot stayed locked in the cockpit, presumably aware that he'd lost whatever power he thought he wielded out in the open cabin. The flight attendants quietly conferred, ensuring that Denise and Aliyah were comfortable. Robert, the lead attendant, informed them that corporate was aware of the ongoing situation and had asked them to keep the peace until landing. Aliyah found it impossible to relax. Her mind circled around the pilot's hostility and the bizarre lengths he'd gone to. She wondered if he was harboring some personal vendetta or had a history of such behavior. Regardless, he had picked the wrong mother-daughter duo and the wrong set of passengers to try it on. 40 minutes from landing, the seatbelt sign came on again as the airplane began its initial descent. Denise packed away her half-eaten snacks and turned off her screen. Aliyah followed suit, her heart thudding in anticipation of the next phase. Their biggest worry, now what would happen once they touched the ground? Would the pilot try to manipulate the authorities or lie about them? She had no idea, but the presence of so many supportive witnesses gave her a sliver of hope. Outside the window, clouds parted, revealing Los Angeles' sprawling cityscape. This was the moment they had been excited for, an opportunity to begin anew in a place brimming with cultural and artistic possibilities. Now it was tainted by the looming threat of yet another clash on the tarmac. The wheels screeched against the runway, and the plane taxied to the gate at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. Passengers collectively breathed a sigh of relief, though an undercurrent of tension remained. Typically, people would stand up and clamor to retrieve their carry-ons. This time, many stayed seated, waiting to see what would happen next. Denise and Aliyah waited, too, hearts pounding. The seatbelt sign turned off. The cabin door opened. Instead of a routine deplaning, a uniformed group of airline staff boarded 2 members from Skyward International's customer relations team, accompanied by an airport police officer. The hush in the cabin deepened. Captain Alton did not emerge from the cockpit. The co-pilot Carmen was seen quietly speaking to one of the customer relations representatives. The lead customer relations manager, a man named Marcus Wright, approached Denise and Aliyah. He introduced himself formally and asked if they could step into the jet bridge to talk. Denise and Aliyah shared a quick look, then agreed. As they gathered their belongings, a small group of passengers insisted on following, eager to provide eyewitness accounts. The crew allowed it, though they looked slightly overwhelmed by the number of people stepping forward. In the jet bridge, the tension felt almost tangible. Marcus Wright tried to usher them all into a more private area, but it was near impossible with so many concerned passengers. Denise introduced herself once more, and then introduced the group behind her as witnesses. Several stepped forward, offering their names, phone numbers, and versions of what they'd observed. Beverly held up her phone, showing partial footage of the second confrontation. Naomi said she'd tweet the video to the airline's account if necessary. The airport police officer, Officer Dylan Perez, listened calmly, occasionally taking notes. His gaze shifted between the passengers and Marcus Wright, who looked increasingly uneasy. Marcus explained that the airline's legal department had mandated a thorough investigation. He also assured them that Captain Alton was being spoken to, and might even be asked to exit the aircraft through a different door to avoid inflaming the situation further. Aliyah's stomach churned. The pilot was cowering or being protected either way. The confrontation she expected wasn't happening face to face. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or frustrated. Denise demanded to know if Captain Alton would be disciplined or suspended. Marcus evaded a direct answer, stating that policy required a formal internal review. That's when Richard Keene, the retired judge, cleared his throat. "You might want to accelerate that review," he said. "If the airline doesn't address this swiftly, you're looking at a serious civil rights lawsuit. Possibly more." Marcus swallowed hard. The mention of a lawsuit clearly carried weight. "We understand," he said, nodding. "In the meantime, Skyward International would like to offer you both a complimentary stay at the LAX Hilton Plus flight vouchers for future travel to express our regret over this incident." Denise's eyes flashed. "A hotel room and some vouchers. That's your response to blatant racism at 30,000 feet." Marcus sighed, glancing at the police officer for support. Officer Perez kept his expression neutral. "I'm just here to maintain the peace and take statements," the officer said. A moment of tense silence followed. Then from behind them, First Officer Carmen Lee approached. Her face was apologetic, and she looked directly at Aliyah. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I tried to reason with him, but he's very set in his ways." Denise stared at her, sizing her up. Carmen continued, "I just want you to know that not everyone in that cockpit shared his views. I plan to submit my own report." Aliyah's throat felt tight. She appreciated Carmen's solidarity, but she couldn't help feeling raw, exposed, and angry. As they all stood there, the air thick with charged energy, Robert Quinn, the lead flight attendant, emerged from the plane, looking a bit flustered. "Marcus, you better come back inside for a moment," he said urgently. Marcus excused himself and hurried into the plane. Several long minutes passed. Denise glanced at Aliyah, who was leaning against the jet bridge wall, hugging her carry-on to her chest. Beverly handed them bottled water, and they both sipped to quell their nerves. Finally, Marcus returned a peculiar mixture of relief and exasperation on his face. "I don't know how else to say this, but Captain Alton has been immediately relieved of duty," he announced. "He'll be escorted off the aircraft by security personnel through a separate exit." A wave of whispers rippled through the group. Some passengers looked almost triumphant. Others were simply relieved. Aliyah felt a surreal sense of validation. It wouldn't heal all the wounds, but it was some immediate measure of accountability. Marcus continued in a measured voice. "In the interest of safety and the well-being of everyone involved, Captain Alton will not operate another Skyward International flight until a full investigation is concluded. We'll provide an official statement to all passengers soon." Denise gave a firm nod, her anger simmering, but satisfied by this initial step. "And what about us?" she asked. "I assume you still want us to speak to your investigation team?" Marcus nodded, offering a polite but strained smile. "Yes, please. We have a team on standby to document your account thoroughly. We'll also arrange for private transportation to your hotel, and we hope you'll accept the vouchers as a gesture of goodwill while we work through the official complaint process." Denise looked at Aliyah, who gave a small shrug, her eyes damp with the emotional toll of the day. "We'll see," Denise said. "Our primary goal was to get here safely, so my daughter can attend her summer art program. If you want to make a real gesture of goodwill, make sure no passenger, especially not a young black girl, is treated like this ever again." With Captain Alton removed from duty, The rest of the passengers were eventually allowed to deplane normally. Many filtered through the jet bridge, throwing Denise and Aliyah sympathetic or supportive looks. Some paused to offer business cards or scribbled notes promising to be available if needed. Naomi handed them a slip of paper with a link to her video recording, telling them to download it before it disappeared from the cloud. Aliyah and Denise found themselves in a swirl of official processes. A representative from Skyward escorted them to a private lounge area where a manager named Teresa Mills took detailed statements. She also set up a laptop for Aliyah to transfer Naomi's video recording onto a USB drive, which could be used as evidence later. During this time, Lucas Porter, Denise's cousin, and the civil rights lawyer called. The moment Denise regained a phone signal, she had texted him a quick update. Upon hearing the entire story, Lucas was incensed. "I'm booking a flight to LA," he said. "I can be there tomorrow. Don't sign anything without me." Denise felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Lucas. This means the world to us." Aliyah sat quietly sipping a soda she'd been offered, staring at the flurry of airline officials around them. She was physically present, yet emotionally adrift. Only a few hours had passed since she boarded the plane, excited for a new adventure. Now she was thrust into an unthinkable drama. She felt older, wearier, but also a spark of resilience glowed in her chest. This was a new chapter, just not the one she'd imagined. Eventually, Aliyah and Denise were chauffeured to the LAX Hilton. They declined dinner invites from airline reps, opting instead for room service to decompress in private. The hotel room was spacious, with a view of the bustling airport in the distance, planes coming and going under the twinkling city lights. Denise paced the room phone in hand, taking calls from Lucas and responding to messages from concerned family members back in Atlanta. Aliyah stood by the window watching the planes climb into the night sky. She felt a strange mixture of fear, relief, and a sense of justice partially served. She turned to her mother. "Mum, am I going to be okay?" She wasn't just asking about the pilot or the airline, but about the weight of racial injustice that now seemed more real than ever. Denise walked over and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Yes, baby. We'll be okay." This wasn't just about us. It was about standing up to ignorance. Aliyah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of determination more than sorrow. "Dad would be proud," she whispered. Denise smiled sadly, pulling her daughter into a hug. "Yes, he would. And you know what else? You've got that summer art program waiting for you. We're going to get you settled in, and you're going to shine just like your shirt says." Skyward International released an official statement the next day, apologizing to all affected passengers and confirming an internal investigation into Captain Roger Alton's conduct. Meanwhile, Denise and Aliyah met with Lucas Porter, who wasted no time drafting the necessary documents to pursue a formal complaint. There were news outlets who picked up the story. Some passengers had posted videos online, and within 24 hours it began trending. But for Aliyah, the most important development was stepping onto the campus of her summer art program a few days later. Though she carried the emotional scars of what happened on flight SI-487, she also felt more resolute than ever. She put her experience on canvas, a series of paintings that depicted the chaos of the airplane cabin, her mother's fierce protective stance, and the solidarity of fellow passengers who refused to let prejudice win. They titled the series High Altitude Truths. It became an instant hit among students and faculty alike, sparking conversations about racism, injustice, and the power of collective action. One of her instructors even suggested a public showing, saying, "Art has the power to change hearts, Aliyah." And so in the wake of one pilot's destructive bias, Aliyah found her voice amplified by the hands of allies, the love of family, and the unwavering belief that truth and justice can indeed rise above the clouds. Thank you for joining us on this intense journey, a testament to how quickly a flight meant for dreams and discovery can turn into a fight for dignity. Yet amid the fear and turmoil, we witnessed the power of unity. Passengers, crew members, and a relentless family refusing to let prejudice have the last word. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked your own sense of justice or reminded you of what it means to stand up for what's right, we invite you to take action. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep these conversations alive, shining a light on discrimination wherever it appears. Because when we speak up together, we turn moments of adversity into stepping stones toward a fairer, more hopeful world. Stay inspired, stay vigilant, and always dare to stand against injustice, no matter the altitude.